Some truths are so brutal that people spend decades pretending, waiting for the perfect moment to expose them. Some parties, no matter how bright the chandeliers shine, can't mask the contempt in your relatives' eyes. Some people, the more they're labeled family, the more you want to vanish from their lives, forever. I used to think I was used to being underestimated, but nothing could have prepared me for that evening. That was when I realized a punch doesn't always come from a fist. It can come from a seemingly polite question. I stood silently in the corner of the living room, champagne swirling in my hand, trying to maintain a faint smile while watching each member of the Walker clan take turns bragging. Laughter echoed through the marble-floored hall. The crystal chandeliers above reflected off shimmering Rolex watches and $1,000 evening gowns worn by the women bearing the Walker name. They called it the annual family gathering, but to me, it had always been a disguised status exam. Uncle Clay, my dad's younger brother, was enthusiastically talking about a $25 million real estate deal he'd just signed in Houston. Nearby, my cousin Brandon showed off his new McLaren, while his mother gently placed a hand on his back like she was cradling treasure. I chuckled internally. Just 4 years ago, Brandon was begging me to help him write his very first job application. "Michael, is that you? I almost didn't recognize you," came the voice of Aunt Evelyn, my dad's sister, from behind me. "Still doing that paperwork job? What was it? Secretary or assistant?" I turned around and smiled. "I'm an administrative coordinator, Aunt Evelyn." "Aye." She took a sip of red wine. "Sounds interesting, but have you thought about moving up? At your age, most of the kids in this family already hold shares in the family company. Like Connor, he just got appointed National Strategy Director." I glanced at Connor, the relative who always wore tailored suits and treated cologne like a status symbol. He was slinging his arm around some investment buddy, boasting about a smooth $12 million deal in Miami. And me, I was being talked about like some temp worker in a government office. "You know," Connor strolled over with a teasing smirk, "if you want, I could put in a word with HR at my firm. Maybe get you into a project assistant role, a real job, not just scheduling meetings and printing handouts." I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm happy where I am, thanks." Connor laughed. "Suit yourself. But if you ever get tired of being an assistant, hit me up." I tightened my grip on the champagne flute, my hand trembling slightly. None of them knew I was the CEO of a business consultancy that had just secured an $80 million contract with a telecommunications giant. None of them knew I built that company from scratch, in a cheap apartment in South Dallas where the AC rattled all night. But I said nothing. I just smiled. "I think Michael's a practical guy," my grandmother chimed in while chewing raisins. "Not everyone's meant to be a leader. Some people are better suited to support roles, like secretaries." "Making good coffee is an art, isn't it, dear?" I nodded. "Yes, and sometimes. That art is enough to run an empire. People just haven't noticed yet." She didn't get it. Neither did anyone else in the room. I stood silently, scanning their faces one by one. The same faces that had laughed when I said I wanted to start a business. The ones who told me, "A guy like you being a secretary is an embarrassment to the Walkers." The ones who said I should feel grateful just to be kept on as a support staffer in some tiny company branch. They knew nothing. Not about me, not about my company, not about the deals I salvaged from being swallowed by their own conglomerate. They only knew the Michael I had created, a persona crafted to hide who I really was for 8 long years. And that's why I was there that night. Not to fit in, not to prove anything, but to watch. To remember who said what and to prepare for the day I'd sit at the boardroom table, not to pour coffee, but to name my terms. 10 years ago, I stood in that same corner of the living room, except back then I'd just graduated with my MBA and still carried what people like to call youthful delusions. I remember that night vividly. Soft jazz played from Uncle Clay's vintage Marshall speaker he always claimed had lifelike sound. The relatives gathered around the outdoor pool, red wine swirling in their glasses, the air thick with pride and self-satisfaction. I wore a borrowed suit from my roommate, the shirt still slightly wrinkled despite my best efforts. In my head was a singular goal: to pitch my idea, the one I had spent nearly 2 years perfecting. So, what are your plans after the MBA? Aunt Evelyn asked as I entered their conversation circle. I took a deep breath. This was it. I have a restructuring plan for near-bankrupt businesses, I began, eyes shining. Unlike traditional consulting firms, my model starts from the ground up, digging into internal operations, changing management frameworks, reallocating resources. It's more cost-efficient, more sustainable. Hold on. Uncle Clay raised a hand, face wrinkled like I'd just suggested growing melons in a restroom. You plan to go independent? I nodded, heart pounding. Yes, and I'm looking for an initial investor. I don't need much, just about $75,000 to get started. A beat of silence, then the entire group burst into laughter. Not the amused kind, but the mocking, dismissive kind. Michael, Brandon patted my shoulder like I was a toddler playing make-believe CEO. You just graduated. You've got nothing. How can you lead anyone? You should be more realistic, Aunt Evelyn chimed in. There are tons of large firms out there with hundreds of staff and massive budgets doing exactly what you're describing. What makes you think you're different? I clenched my jaw. I believe in my model, if I had the chance. You could start in the family company, Uncle Clay cut in. We always have room in tech support. Learn the ropes first, then think about startups. He went quiet. I don't want to be Brandon's secretary, I said softly, eyes drifting to my cousin's smug grin. I want to create something truly valuable. Uncle Clay waved a hand. Value is profit. No money, no value. Remember that, Michael? This is the real world. There I was, surrounded by walkers. People who believed success came from inherited wealth, printed names on business cards, and reserved seats at the family firm. No one asked how long my business plan was. No one read a single line of the proposal I'd written over 3 months. They didn't look at the financial model, didn't care about the market analyses backed by data, because they had never intended to listen. To them, I was just Michael, the son of the less accomplished eldest Walker, the one they called the detour of the family. And I, the obedient straight-A kid, was forever in the shadow of the luckier ones. That night, I sat alone on the back steps. The June wind was stifling hot, carrying laughter from inside the mansion. I looked up at the Texas sky full of stars, then pulled out my phone. On the screen was an unsent email. The investment proposal attached, with a detailed cash flow, Excel file, and SWOT chart. We hit send, not to them, to myself, just to remind me that I didn't need permission from any of them. That night I made 2 decisions. 1, I would start my business on my own. 2, I would make them regret ever laughing. The next morning, I returned to my rented apartment in Garland, sold my only TV, canceled my gym membership, and started compiling a list of small local businesses facing financial crises. I had no money, but I had time, I had ideas, and I had a burning anger fierce enough to incinerate any shred of doubt. No one ever told me that entrepreneurship smelled like overused frying oil and burnt onions wafting through the door crack every morning. But that was the scent of the very first headquarters of Summit Solutions, the company I founded with nothing but an old laptop, a scratched wooden desk, and a dream crushed by my entire family. I rented a tiny office on the 2nd floor of a Chinese restaurant called Lucky Dragon, where, each time the owner stir-fried noodles, smoke filled the stairwell. Rent, $300 a month. No elevator, no signage, no air conditioning. The Texas summer left sweat dripping from my forehead even when I sat still. But I didn't care. This was the first place I was in charge. No one bossing me around, no one belittling me. No relatives standing behind me to correct my actions. Just me, and the idea they all once laughed at. I named the company Summit Solutions because Summit was what I aimed for and solutions were what I offered. Not gimmicks, not takeovers, but real strategies that could save a dying business. On the first day, I stared at a blank screen, wondering who would trust a 26-year-old with no reputation beyond an MBA and a box of self-printed business cards. The answer came from a tiny listing on the local classifieds. Senor Richardson's Mechanical, nearing bankruptcy, seeking financial consultant. I went to see them the very next day. They were a small workshop with 18 employees, producing machine parts for oil refineries. Status: 2 quarters behind on taxes, orders down 60%, and the former director had just fled due to a lawsuit. They had already contacted 4 major consulting firms. None had replied. I walked into the meeting wearing a wrinkled shirt and brought a PowerPoint presentation I had made myself. The shop owner, Mr. Richard Vaughn, a man in his 50s with sun-worn skin and tired eyes, remained silent throughout the entire pitch. When I finished, he said one sentence I'll never forget. "You're the only one who looked at our numbers and didn't run." I worked there every day from 8 in the morning until late at night. I combed through every invoice, negotiated with the tax office, optimized production processes. I discovered they had hundreds of faulty parts returned due to missing quality checks, and I proposed an on-site inspection model. I redesigned the cash flow reporting system and launched a simple yet effective marketing campaign targeting factories in Louisiana. 3 months later, Richardson's wasn't just surviving, they were turning a profit. Mr. Vaughn called me into his office and placed a small envelope on the desk. I thought it was a bonus, but inside was a handwritten letter of recommendation. If anyone needs someone to save their company, call him. Don't ask about degrees, look at results. He didn't have big connections, but he had a friend who owned an aluminum plant in Fort Worth. That friend referred me to a logistics company, which led to a family-run garment factory in Austin. I didn't need advertising. I had whispers from the mouths of people who had once lost hope. When the 5th client found me, I knew it was time to expand, but I also knew people needed to believe I was just an employee, not the owner. I hired my first assistant, a sharp, discreet 24-year-old woman named Maya. She was the first person I trusted with my true identity. Everyone else believed I was just the project coordination assistant, and the CEO, he never showed up. We had NDAs signed by every employee, every partner. All documents were relayed by Maya. I disappeared from all official paperwork. Summit Solutions was operated from the shadows, and that was my greatest strength. Because I knew one thing: if my family found out I was running a company capable of blocking their takeovers, they'd destroy me, and I wasn't ready to face them. Not yet. For the next year, I worked almost non-stop. I ate microwaved meals, drank cheap coffee, and slept on a fold-out sofa in the office. But every report I analyzed, every number I pulled back from the edge of collapse, was proof of one thing: I didn't need a single one of them to succeed. I kept that second-floor office, even though the company's headquarters is now a skyscraper in downtown Dallas. Every time I stop by, I sit at that old wooden desk, listen to the sizzling pans downstairs, and remind myself, success doesn't come from where you start, it comes from daring to start when no one believes you can. I understood one thing clearly: to defeat the Walker family, I couldn't let them know I existed, at least not in any real way, because to them, anyone outside the family power structure is either invisible or an obstacle. I chose to be both. In the second year, after Summit Solutions had a stable cash flow, I officially removed my name from every legal document tied to the company. I created a holding company under Maya's name, my loyal assistant and the only person who knew the truth. She handled all the paperwork, signed every contract, and to the world, Maya was the face in the spotlight. And me, I was just Michael, the technical coordinator, or the data department assistant, depending on the client. No one suspected that the guy bringing the laptop to meetings and brewing coffee every morning was the one crafting the entire turnaround strategy. And I gave them no reason to suspect. I even maintained a side office on the 4th floor of an old building in Fort Worth, looking exactly like a soon-to-close small branch. Inside, I sat among whiteboards plastered with data, analyzing each company being targeted by Wilson Holdings, the conglomerate run by my family using shady tactics. I hadn't forgotten what they'd taught me when I was a kid. Buy cheap, squeeze debt, break up, sell fast. That was the Walker motto in every deal. To them, businesses weren't people. They were payrolls and liquidatable assets. I made Summit the antidote to that philosophy. We didn't advertise. We only showed up when every other firm had said no. The companies being hunted by Wilson Holdings, the business owners on the verge of collapse, those were our clients. I found them before my family could name a price. Every time Summit rescued a company, I sent an anonymous email to the Wilson Holdings investment division with only one sentence attached. Too late, again. I didn't need fame. I needed time. I needed them to keep thinking I was still drifting in some dead-end job so they wouldn't notice the threat growing quietly beneath their feet. When relatives visited the office, I brought the coffee, smiled, and took notes on document print requests. They had no idea I was the one who wrote the strategic proposal they were studying. They called me Quiet Michael, and that made me stronger. One time, Brandon, my cousin, came to Summit's new headquarters, pretending to explore a potential partnership. While Maya gave a brief introduction, he leaned over and whispered to me, "How long have you been working here? Don't let them wring you dry and leave you with nothing. If you want a real opportunity, give me a call." I nodded, replying in a calm tone, "I think I'm learning a lot from this place." He didn't understand that I was being honest. I was learning how to make a corporation like Wilson Ventures realize it was surrounded, once every exit had already been sealed. In the fourth year, I personally orchestrated the restructuring campaign for Dallas Steelworks, which had been targeted for acquisition by Uncle Clay. They had been quietly driving the stock price down with negative media coverage, then swooped in with an offer worth only 1/3 of the company's actual valuation. I uncovered the entire network of fabricated reports and compiled them into an internal document sent directly to the CEO of Steelworks. 8 weeks later, the stock price rose by 52%, and the acquisition deal collapsed spectacularly. Wilson Ventures lost nearly $8 million by betting against the market. They never knew it was me. And that's what pleased me the most. Every night, I sat alone in the office, staring at the list. It's company my family's targeting. And next to it, a new column. Next company I will save. I didn't see myself as a hero. I had no delusion that I was doing something grand. But for every family on the verge of losing a company built over 3 generations, for every employee about to be laid off because of a cold corporate takeover, I was the last name they called before giving up. I used to think I started this company for revenge. But by the 6th year, I realized I started it because I wanted to prove that business could still be done without crushing others underfoot. That's why I kept everything a secret, not because I was afraid, but because I needed time. Time to make Summit strong enough, big enough, stable enough, that one day I wouldn't need to hide anymore. My phone buzzed just as I finished my espresso. Wilson Ventures has called an emergency meeting regarding Williams Manufacturing. 9 a.m. tomorrow, full executive board presence required. I smirked. So they had accepted defeat. My family, after years of calling the shots, was now knocking on the door of Summit Solutions, a company they had no idea was led by the one they once treated as a nobody within the family. I glanced at the clock, 8:57 a.m. Summit's main boardroom was on the 21st floor, glass walls, a 20-foot-long oak table, and black leather chairs arranged in perfect symmetry. Maya, as always, was waiting for me at the elevator, tablet in hand, her expression calm and composed. "They're here," she said. "Uncle Clay's leading the group. Brandon, James, and Aunt Evelyn are with him. They think they're meeting the real CEO today." I nodded slightly. "They'll get their wish." Maya smiled. "Uncle Clay's sitting at the head of the table, just the way he likes to act like he's in control." "Good," I replied, adjusting my collar. "Did you serve the coffee?" "Already did. Aunt Evelyn asked where the service staff was. I told her, the assistant will bring it right in." I chuckled. I had once made coffee in that very room, using those very same mugs. But today, I wouldn't be standing beside a metal cart. Today, I would be at the head of the table, where all eyes would be forced to land. I pushed open the heavy double doors. The air inside was dead still. Uncle Clay looked up from his folder, his brows tightening the moment he saw me walk in. "Michael," his voice was as heavy as lead. "What are you doing here?" I walked over to the chair at the head of the table, pulled it out, and sat down, back straight, eyes sweeping the room. "Good morning, Uncle Clay, Brandon, James, Aunt Evelyn." I nodded at each of them. "I'm Michael Walker," I said, every word deliberate, "CEO of Summit Solutions." In dead silence. Brandon dropped his pen. James sat frozen with his mouth agape. Evelyn's hand stopped midair, spilling coffee on her dress without her even noticing. Only Clay, seasoned from decades of deal-making, managed to react quickly. "No way," he growled. "You're an assistant?" "That was a role, huh?" I said, eyes locked. This is who I really am." Maya entered, carrying a stack of documents. She placed copies of the merger terms in front of each person. "I think we should begin," I said, fingers interlocked on the table. "These are Summit Solutions' conditions for considering Wilson Ventures' participation in the restructuring of Williams Manufacturing." James stuttered. "Wait, we thought we'd be negotiating with the real CEO of Summit. You're speaking to him now." I looked him square in the eyes. "And if I'm not mistaken, you once told me, don't expect a real opportunity while you're still brewing coffee." "Well, luckily, I don't serve coffee anymore." Clay slammed his hand on the table. "You set up your own family? Hid your identity? Sabotaged our investment plan? This is betrayal." "No," I replied evenly. "This is strategy, and you know it. If Summit hadn't stepped in, Williams would already be in your hands, broken up, sold off, with hundreds of employees laid off. I couldn't let that happen. Not one more company." "You're turning against your own blood?" Evelyn practically screamed. "For strangers?" "For justice." I hammered every word. "Because I'm sick of watching you step on others to build your castles." Brandon glared at me. "Do you even know what you're doing, Michael? You're destroying this family." I turned on the projector. The latest financial report of Summit Solutions appeared on the screen. Over $98 billion in managed assets. A 92% success rate in business restructurings. Active in 9 major cities and expanding into international markets. I watched their faces go pale one by one. "And just so we're clear," I continued, flipping to the next slide, "Summit is currently considering acquiring 26% of Wilson Ventures open market shares. If you refuse our merger terms, by 9 a.m. tomorrow, the first buyer will begin collecting stock." Clay shot up from his seat. "You're a bastard." "No," I replied, calm as a breath. "I just learned from the best. I learned how to fight back, how to take control. The difference is, I don't crush people to win." I stood, gathering the contracts. "You have until 5 p.m. today to respond. After that, the offer will be withdrawn." Before leaving the room, I turned and looked at Evelyn. "Oh, Aunt Evelyn, the coffee you drank this morning, it's from a cafe chain Summit acquired last year. And the champagne at last night's party? Also from a winery I bought 2 months ago." I smiled. "Turns out your knows how to spend money after all." Just as I closed the door behind me, Maya handed me a new set of documents. "You should get back in there," she said softly, eyes still on her tablet. "They're starting to panic." I exhaled. Good. It's time they saw this game was never theirs to begin with. I walked back into that conference room where, just minutes ago, the name Michael Walker had been a bitter family joke. Now, I saw faces twisted in shock, worry, and fear. It was the very thing I had waited 10 years to see. I stepped forward and connected my laptop to the projector. The screen lit up with Summit Solutions' deep navy glue logo, followed by the words, "When businesses face crisis, we stand at the edge and lift them back." I opened the first slide. My voice was steady. Not loud, but every word landed with the weight of an anvil. Summit currently manages over $122 billion in corporate assets, with a restructuring success rate of 94% across a total of 212 deals over the past 8 years. James grimaced. Brandon picked up his phone but found no signal. Maya had already arranged for the meeting room to be temporarily signal blocked. I continued. Of the failed acquisitions pursued by Wilson Ventures over the last 3 years, at least 11 were derailed by a mysterious consulting firm. I clicked the remote. The next slide showed a list of notable deals. Derrick Logistics, James's acquisition target, Meridian Textiles, Brandon's deal, Westgate Pharma, Uncle Clay's largest strategic plan. Each was marked successfully intervened by Summit Solutions. Randall jumped to his feet. "You've been tracking us?" "No," I said slowly. "I've been protecting the businesses you tried to devour. I'm the reason you couldn't slash prices, couldn't lay off hundreds, couldn't bleed companies dry before forcing them to sell." Clay clenched his fists. "You've been secretly sabotaging Wilson Ventures for years, and now you're planning to seize power through a merger?" I smiled, calmly, as if sipping tea. "I don't need a merger to take control. Summit currently owns 19% of Wilson Ventures through intermediary holdings. And if today's proposal isn't signed by 5 o'clock, we'll acquire another 8% on the open market tomorrow morning." The air in the room thickened like cigar smoke. James broke into a sweat, flipping open his laptop. This can't be. Who allowed this?" I pressed the remote again, displaying a market analysis of Summit's influence in the corporate consulting sector across the southeastern United States. The data was clear and precise, from restructuring contracts to operating costs to average return on investment time. We didn't just exist, we led. "You never saw me," I said, locking eyes with Clay, "because you never thought I could be a threat. You were too busy laughing at me while I quietly built something you've never touched. Respect." Evelyn whispered, almost as if she couldn't believe it herself. "Every major deal we lost, it was you?" I nodded. "And now," I gestured to the contract in front of them, "I'm giving you one last chance. Sign this merger agreement. Summit retains control of Williams Manufacturing's restructuring. Wilson Ventures keeps a non-controlling 12% stake." "And if we refuse?" Clay asked, voice like ice. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room, at the faces of the relatives who had dismissed me, the ones who believed I'd never rise beyond the coffee cart. Then I said quietly, "If you refuse, I'll begin buying every share of Wilson Ventures I can get my hands on, and this time I won't be hiding." Brandon shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. "Your family." "Family?" I laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "When you tore up my first business proposal, did you remember I was family? When Aunt Evelyn declared I'd be best suited as an office clerk, when Uncle Clay said a guy like you isn't worth investing in, what was I then?" No one answered. I checked my watch. 4:48. I slid the pen toward Clay. 12 minutes left. Make your choice. The tension was suffocating. No more excuses, no more smug smirks. Here I was, the man once seen as nothing more than a forgettable resume, forcing a powerful corporation to choose between survival and collapse. And they knew, this time, there was no way out. Just 3 hours after I left the boardroom, the first call came from Wilson Ventures' board of directors. They didn't ask why. They only asked for terms. No one questioned who was in charge anymore. By midnight, the merger agreement was officially signed. Quietly, with heads bowed. Summit Solutions took over the restructuring process. Wilson Ventures retained a non-voting 12% stake, exactly as I had stated. The next morning, the media exploded. The overlooked assistant was $1 million CEO all along. Michael Walker, the quiet storm that shattered Dallas's most powerful family. I didn't grant a single interview, but the video of the merger meeting, where I revealed the truth to my entire family, was officially posted on Summit's website under one simple headline: "Thank you for underestimating me." But the video was just the beginning. 2 days later, I released a recording from the family reunion 10 years ago, when I pitched my original restructuring idea and was laughed at, mocked for being delusional. The clip ended with Uncle Clay pouring a drink and shouting, "If you want to succeed, start by learning how to print documents properly, Michael." The video went viral. Hundreds of thousands of shares, millions of views. The internet rallied behind me. People saw a piece of themselves in the overlooked son, the man who endured in silence for a decade just to rise at the right moment. And they raged at those who had crushed someone's dreams for the sake of bloodline and power. The first blow hit Brandon, the arrogant cousin who once patted my shoulder and offered me a real job. The law firm he worked for faced backlash. Several clients canceled contracts, stating they didn't want to work with someone who couldn't recognize talent. A week later, he was placed on indefinite leave, effectively dismissed. James, the eternal sidekick to power, was the quickest to pivot. 3 days after the deal, he sent me a private email. Not an apology, just a proposal. We could build an empire together. I'm ready to invest my name and money into Summit. I read it. I didn't reply. A week later, he showed up in the Summit headquarters lobby with a huge bouquet. Maya didn't let him in. I don't need opportunists. I need people who believed from the start. Aunt Evelyn, who once scoffed and called me a great coffee maker, tried to reach out to the media, saying she always saw potential in Michael. But the internet didn't forget. That reunion clip, where she laughed and called my startup dream childish, was shared everywhere with the hashtag #WakeUpEvelyn. Eventually, she was asked to step down from 2 charity advisory boards. I still haven't received a real apology. But the biggest fall came to Uncle Clay, the last symbol of the Walker family's power. Right after the merger, Wilson Ventures' board called an emergency meeting. The Loyalists began questioning his leadership, citing years of failed deals. 3 of the top members now owned shares in Summit. They knew exactly who was steering the ship. A week later, Uncle Clay announced his retirement. No ceremony, no speeches, just a scattered memo sent via internal email. No one cried. He showed up at my office door one gloomy afternoon. Maya tried to stop him, but I nodded. Clay walked in. The age in his face was unmistakable. No longer the proud man who once humiliated me at a party. I didn't come to apologize, he said, sitting down without waiting to be invited. I came to understand why. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I placed in front of him a printed copy of an internal Wilson Ventures report that had leaked, showing that many companies Summit had intervened in had recovered more strongly than any deal he'd ever bragged about. You don't need to understand, I said. You just need to know that arrogance cost our family everything. And you should have listened sooner. Clay stood, said nothing more. Before leaving, he turned back, his eyes heavy. You won, Michael. Congratulations. I didn't respond, because I didn't need that congratulations. What I needed, I already had the moment I walked into that boardroom that day. Recognition. From the very people who once denied my worth. 6 months after the day I sat across from my entire family at the conference table and forced them to sign the truth, Summit Solutions had not only changed my financial standing, we changed the way the business world in the region viewed power. Summit was no longer the quiet name behind restructuring deals. It had become a symbol of something entirely different, that ethical business could exist, grow, and win without having to crush anyone along the way. I no longer worked from the shadows. I started appearing at conferences, on the covers of business magazines, and at economic forums, not as a mysterious CEO, but as the founder of a new philosophy: restructure through restoration, not destruction. We established the Community Renewal Fund, offering capital and strategy support to small businesses founded by women and minorities. Maya became the director of the fund, and she personally signed the first investment, a lifeline to a struggling bookstore chain in Austin that was on the brink of closure. I'll never forget the look in the founder's eyes, a single mother around 40 years old, when she received the support package. She held my hand, said nothing, and just cried. And I understood. Not everyone has the privilege of waiting 10 years to prove their worth. Stomach also changed how we hired. We didn't care where you went to school, we cared how you lived. I interviewed every candidate, never looking at transcripts, only asking, how badly were you underestimated? And what did you do to rise beyond it? My new executive office had one large phrase mounted on the wall. We don't choose the best on paper, we choose those once deemed worthless who still stood up. At the end of that year, I was invited to speak at the National Business Innovation Awards, where seasoned CEOs used to pat each other's backs on stage like they embodied power itself. But this time, I stood in the spotlight, microphone in hand, with thousands of eyes watching. I didn't talk about profit. I told the story of a man who once brewed coffee, who was laughed at, excluded by his own family, and who used silence to build an empire. When I stepped off that stage, crystal trophy in hand, an older woman stopped me in the hallway backstage. I'm Kayla's mother, the young woman who just joined Summit last month, she said, her eyes shining. She was fired once for daring to challenge her former boss. She told me, I'll never let anyone define my worth again. Because at Summit, they don't do that. I smiled. And for the first time in years, I felt strangely light. Then, one Thursday afternoon, as I was organizing documents for a meeting with investors from Seattle, Maya walked in. She was holding a thick, carefully sealed envelope. Letter from Clay Walker, she said, placing it gently on my desk. I stared at the envelope for a few seconds in silence. Then I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, neat penmanship, something I didn't think he even remembered how to use after years of ruling through power and email. Michael, I don't expect your forgiveness. I just want to leave one last thing before stepping down from everything. I used to think success meant conquest, forcing others to collapse. But you showed me. True success is lifting others up, even when you were the one who pushed them down. Thank you for not crushing me when you had the chance. I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer, and said nothing. Not because I forgave him, but because I no longer needed to carry that weight. The next month, I hosted the first Walker family gathering since the merger, but not at their mansion. It was held at Summit Solutions headquarters, in the very boardroom where I once quietly took notes and poured coffee. There was no wine on the table, only bold coffee from Summit's new line, sourced from the chain we had just acquired. Each mug bore the phrase, "For those who were once underestimated." Some relatives came, reluctantly it seemed, but no one brought their old condescending tones. Some stayed quiet, avoiding eye contact. I didn't need their validation. I only needed them to see what I had built, not for revenge, but to prove that success doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives in silence, yet cannot be silenced. And that was the end of one journey. Not the end of me, but the end of the version of me that had been dismissed. Now I am Michael Walker, the one who was rejected, the one erased from his own family dinner table. And I rebuilt everything, with the same hands they once made serve coffee. Michael's story is living proof that success doesn't have to come from a name or a legacy, but from persistence and quiet resolve. Dismissed, denied, and discarded, he didn't fight back with anger, but with results. While others were busy flexing power, Michael chose to build it silently. And in doing so, he redefined what it means to succeed. Not the loudest in the room, but the one who makes everyone listen when he finally speaks. What do you think about Michael's journey and how he faced the disregard from his own family? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow this channel for more moving and powerful family stories.